Point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
So this is precisely the type of attitude that enabled the housing bubble and the credit boom that led to the financial crisis of 2007. This type of attitude, which is characterized by firms taking on excessive risks through leverage, was what led to the first introduction of the Basel Accord in 1992. Basel I was introduced by the Bank for International Settlements to address the problem of over-leverage after the market crash of 1988 and the late 80s and the subsequent economic slowdown of 1991. So fast forward to the late 90s, and a similar policy environment of easy credit spurs on the dot-com boom and makes the effects of the subsequent recession in 2003 and 2004 even more pronounced. So in 2004, Basel II, the second of the Basel Accords, was established to create an international standard that banking regulators could use when creating regulations about how much capital banks need to put aside to guard against excessive financial and operational risks. So as you can see historically, the introduction of the Basel Accords and the Basel Amendments have followed market dips, first in 1992, then in 2004, and right now it's only natural that after such a catastrophic market event, Basel III would get approved.
So to get more of a professional perspective on the issue of leverage in banks, we actually took the opportunity to speak with someone with professional experience, Damien Krieber from RBC Capital Markets and the Leverage Finance Group. Damien, first of all, what has been put in place, what has changed to try and bring in this level of leverage that caused the crisis?
Well, there's been quite a few things that have been put in place, Andrew, with respect to trying to, not have banks fail and not have the financial crisis that we did have. But one of the main things that I'm going to highlight today probably makes sense to be Basel III, and the new requirements are expected to come into play kind of in the next 2 years. And one of the main things with that is the new capital requirement ratios, which the definition of common equity especially is changing, so that the tier 1 capital that the bank has to hold is all of a sudden a lot tighter. So the amount of capital that they'll have will be a lot more significant compared to what they used to have under the Basel II requirements. And the more interesting thing is for every dollar that the bank now lends, it will, especially on revolving facilities and term loans, it will have to match like an additional dollar and keep it on hand.
So that'll greatly impact the way that you guys do business, essentially.
It will definitely, and one of the things that has been brought up, it's definitely a good thing from a leverage perspective in terms of the bank. It's pretty hard to fail when every dollar that you've given out, you have a dollar to match it. So we can always cover our losses, and you're not ever asking people to bail you out, but it does have a negative impact from an economic standpoint, where if you are lending out that money and you have to match it, all of a sudden the dollars that you're lending are a lot more expensive, and you're worried from an economic perspective, does that help businesses build? Because it's a lot more expensive to get your hands on capital as a business, and when your capital requirements are higher, it's not a great way to run your business. So.
But in effect, are the changes that are being made, are they going to prevent a similar catastrophic event in the future? What is really coming out of this?
I think that the main point of Basel III is definitely to prevent the catastrophic problems that we did have in 2008, 2009, and restore lending levels to what they used to be. They've been coming back recently. So I think that yes, it will definitely, if we have every dollar, it's pretty hard to go bankrupt. But as I said before, we can be safe, but it doesn't mean the economy is working well. And you have to try to find a happy medium between not having people fail every time the economy goes down and allowing the economy to grow like it should. So personally, I think that it probably makes sense for it to be somewhere in the middle between matching dollar for dollar and the current requirement of 10%. But I'm not the one who makes the decision. So
that's great. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Now, this new regulation Damien discussed is encouraging, but it does little to address the needs of thousands of Americans who have lost their homes and had their personal wealth destroyed.
Here we go, buddy.
bailouts have helped keep banks on their feet, while the American consumer has been left struggling in conditions that in many cases rival the third world. Restoring public faith in the financial system and quelling outrage could be the greatest challenge in emerging from this crisis. Without confidence in their savings, bankers, or government, people are unwilling to invest, and the fundamental building blocks of capitalism collapse. Perhaps the most pressing issue is how to avoid financial disasters like this in the future. Can we move forward and learn from what's happened, or are we condemned to repeat this cycle of overindulgence and calamity? We heard Damien provide a banking perspective and suggest that Basel III is perhaps over-restrictive and will strangle economic growth. How do we balance the need to spur on economic activity while curtailing greed? Will regulation alone be enough, or do we need a more fundamental change in human mindset? Exploitation and greed must be replaced by self-restraint and pragmatism. Human behavior, rather than government regulation, will determine whether or not the current crisis is repeated.